What's going on, everybody? This is Alex Harshman with Wholesale to Freedom. For those who don't know, this channel is all about me teaching you all how to wholesale, whether you're doing it virtually or locally, and I do this absolutely free. I share with you the mistakes, the failures, the successes that I had in my business. That way you can capitalize off my mistakes, learn from them, save yourself time, money, and energy in your business. In today's video, we're going to be going over to the part 2 of my first deal series where I made $65,000. If you want to check out part 1 because you haven't seen it yet, it's going to be down in the description below. Also, today we're going to be going over how I found my buyer once I was under contract. So let's get right into it. If you find any value from this video, again, please give us a thumbs up as it does help the YouTube algorithm. Also, be sure to subscribe down below. Click that notification bell. That way you get notified anytime I go live or I post a new video. So that way you guys can get the latest tips and tricks on how to wholesale. When we left off in part 1, we had just gone under contract with the seller, and now it was time to go find a buyer. I did this by sending an email out to my buyers list that I had built through going to local real estate meetups. I talk about this in how I got started in wholesaling video I have. I'll link that in the description. But real estate meetups or real estate investor associations are great places to start whenever you're starting out in real estate investing, whatever you're doing in real estate. There's nothing but a bunch of real estate professionals that go there. You can network with each other, exchange information, and it's a great place to find your buyers because there's a lot of buy and hold investors as well as a lot of fix and flippers who are looking actively for deals. So it's a great place to network, figure out what they're looking for, so that way when you get something, you can send out an email to them. I posted an advertisement for the contract on the property just like I did in my email. And that is actually where my first buyer came from, was that Craigslist ad. So let's talk about this buyer. The buyer had called me and asked me about this property because they were looking for rentals that they could put in their portfolio as they were looking for their first investment property or properties. They mentioned they've been looking for quite some time, but they just haven't found anything that met their criteria. I asked them what their criteria was, and they mentioned to me that they were looking for something that needed a little bit of work that they could capitalize on and make some cash flow in the end, or make some positive income each month, passively. I let them know I had a perfect property for them, the 6-unit property that just needed proper management and a few minor repairs, and they were good to go. They were very excited about the property. I was very excited to show it to them. However, I should have realized that that was the first red flag whenever they mentioned that they were looking for their first property on top of not having picked out a property after looking for a long time. That shows me that they're not willing to commit whenever it comes time to putting an offer in. Let's talk about the first hurdle that I had with this whole process. At this point, I thought I had the deal sold because the phone call went very well with the buyer. They seemed very interested. I built a lot of rapport with the seller over the phone. Thought this was going to be a very simple deal. But now I had to figure out how I was going to show the property with all 5 tenants in there and coordinate with all 5 tenants. So for those who don't know, the tenants only need a 24-hour heads up before the landlord can just go in there and show the property. That way, if you need to schedule a showing or anything, you can let them know in case they don't know, and it's also good to know for yourself in case you have any rentals down the road. I called and asked the seller if we could get into the property, and he said that's no problem. I said, great, should we call the tenants ourselves? You know, do you have their phone numbers? That way we can coordinate with them and we don't have to involve you, making it even more hassle-free for you. He mentioned he didn't want to do that because, well, he was afraid to spook the tenants into thinking that he was selling it, because at that point they probably wouldn't have paid him or they might have damaged the property. At least in his eyes, that's what he was thinking. He told me that he would schedule the showing with them for us and that he would meet us at the property. This brings me to my second hurdle. When I was on the phone with him, he also mentioned that he didn't want to show the property more than once because he was driving out of state, and on top of that, he didn't want to spook the tenants again. And for that reason, he asked not to have a lot of people at the showing. At the time, I didn't think too much about that because, well, I thought this was going to be a done deal with the buyer I had talked to. I did my filtering per se. I asked them if they could close quickly, pay all cash. They said yes. And at the time, that was the only filtering that I did. The question I asked myself was, should I wait for more interested buyers, or should I just take the leap of faith with this one? That way I don't overwhelm the seller and the tenants and just hope that this one works out. I made another mistake and I thought I was just going to try to make it work with that one buyer. Looking back on that now, I would have just tried to get multiple buyers there, maybe at different times, in order to not overwhelm the seller and the tenants. or just to have them all come at once no matter what anyways, and just say, hey, listen, this is what we have. This brings me to my next hurdle. This time I had to worry about the buyer and the seller being at the same place at the same time, because for those who may know, us as wholesalers, we walk a fine line with the seller. We promise them a hassle-free sale in exchange for a deeply discounted price for our end buyers. And because of that, if the buyer says or does anything that rubs the seller the wrong way, it could really blow up the deal for everybody. And that's something we don't want to happen. So what we can do to prevent that is to condition the buyer beforehand, letting them know exactly what I just told you. Hey, this is a fine line we're walking. In exchange for a hassle-free sale, we promise the sellers we're able to get this deeply discounted price for you. In return, we need you to understand that we operate just like this. And you can let them know that they're the contractors, they're your partner, whatever you say in your business. But in this instance, I let them know, hey, you're my partner in this deal. You might have a couple questions. If you do, please ask me directly. And at that time, if I don't have the answer, I will ask the seller directly myself. That way we maintain that relationship, that balance, and we don't blow up this deal for anybody. And believe it or not, the showing went extremely well. I built a lot of rapport with the seller, and actually the buyer and seller got along very well, and they were able to exchange, questions and answers to each other. And because of that, I felt very strongly about this buyer and very strongly about this deal. I thought it was a done deal once again. The buyer had told me after the walkthrough that, they'd let me know within 24 hours. And this property was in immaculate condition. It's not often that this happens, but the seller actually told us that it needed more repairs than what it actually needed. And it was in better condition than what they explained. That never happens. The buyer told me that they would call within 24 hours with their decision. Again, I thought I had this in the bag. Now this brings me to my fourth hurdle. The buyer called me later that night and let me know that they were very interested in the property and they were ready to move forward. I thought to myself, well, great, let's sign the agreement. And they said, hold up, wait a minute. I need to have a 14-day inspection contingency. I'm afraid with the apartment being over 100 years old, that it's going to have some foundation issues. And I let them know, hey, we walked the entire property through the basement to the attic and we didn't see any foundational issues or anything that would be a cause for concern. Why would we need to do this? And they said, well, we just want to be secure about our investment and make sure we're getting a good deal. I let them know, hey, this is normal in our city that have these age of properties. Also, the condition's pretty common. This one is actually in a lot better condition than a lot of the ones I've seen before. I told them the contingency is just not going to work because we have too much interest in the property and that we don't want to waste that much time. They let me know that they could do it from a 14-day inspection contingency to a 4-day inspection contingency. And at that point, I felt like, hey, this is my only option at this point. I don't want them to call my bluff and I don't have anything. So I said, okay, that's great. Now, how much could you put down? And at this point, they said, I could put down $500. And I knew this was another red flag, and I just knew they were not serious buyers at this point. I said, there's no way my partner would let me do that. We had to be at least $2,500 in order to take this off the market or take the advertisement off. They told me they just couldn't put up $2,500 because that was just too much. They have too many properties. They don't want to tie up all their cash. And that right there, I knew that they weren't serious buyers. No serious buyer is going to say that. And I say this because if you have a serious buyer, more of the times than not, they're going to walk through the property 5 to 10 minutes later. They're going to know exactly what they need to do, how much they need to budget for the repairs, and the offer that they need to be at. They don't care how much they have to put down as long as the deal is a deal. And what happens is when we have inexperienced investors or fix and flippers or buy and hold investors, they don't know how to negotiate. So the best way they do that is through contingencies, and through the inspection they're going to find something that was going to renegotiate you because they feel like they got you in a chokehold at that point because they tied up the property for this long and they feel like they have the upper hand on you. And for that reason, I don't ever go in agreement with a buyer unless I absolutely have to with any contingencies, because a contingency just means that they can back out for any reason or whatever the reason of the contingency is. For example, termite inspection. They could say, well, I found termite damage. They would have to provide proof, but if they know somebody, they could just come up with any reason really. Most times, if they don't have an agreement with you that says they can't get their deposit back no matter what, they're going to get that deposit back, so there's virtually no risk to them and all the risk to you, losing the deal. At this point, I felt crushed. You know, I thought I had the property sold. I thought these buyers were going to be it. And I remember the seller telling me they're only going to show this property one time. I thought this was going to be the one time I needed to do it, and it just didn't work out. And oftentimes this does happen, especially when you don't know how to filter buyers correctly. I have a whole video on that if you want to check it out in the description below. So the buyer fell through. Now what? I had to figure out how I was going to explain this to the seller, because I didn't want to waste his time anymore, even if I didn't have or did have a buyer set up. So I knew the first thing I wanted to do was get a buyer in place that was interested, that I filtered them a little bit more before scheduling a new appointment with the seller. And I did just that. I was brainstorming on what seemed like forever on how I could find a buyer very quickly. I still had a lot of time in the deal, but you know, as the time goes on in the deal and you don't have any traction going, the likelier it's going to happen to where the deal falls apart. And I know this from experience because it's happened to me many times where I just didn't perform, or I didn't do a deal in time, and because that the deal fell through, or the seller lost trust in me. Also, networking with other investors, they've had the same issues. So a big lesson here is to get this done as fast as possible. Out of luck of the draw, I had a realtor call me up that I had networked with through a real estate meeting, and he asked me if I had any rentals available. He had some retail buyers that would be interested in buying some right now. I said, yeah, you're calling at the perfect time. I got a 6-unit available. He said, great, let's set up a time and we'll go from there. So after I got off the phone call, a couple things had happened. One, I remember this person had never worked with a wholesaler before. This person had never worked with a wholesaler before. On top of that, I knew his buyers would be bringing a bank loan to the property, which would have threw another hurdle into that. And just because I wanted to make this a seamless transaction, I figured that was not the best option. However, him calling me reminded me of another realtor that I mentioned in the part 1 video, who specialized in these types of properties, selling them, and he does them all the time. He had actually mentioned to me he had sold a property right around the corner, same condition, same layout, for $250,000. I was only advertising this for $200,000. And because he called me, it reminded me to call this other realtor, which I did just that. After I called this other realtor who's been around a lot longer and has worked with wholesalers before, he let me know to send over the photos and the information I had on the property. After I did that, he said, yeah, I got a buyer in place that would be willing. I have a buyer who's interested in this property right now. He said, in exchange for me bringing the buyer, I would like to have 6% commission and I can sell it for $235,000. Of course, I was thinking, well, yeah, I would pay 6%. That was only $13,000 and I'm making $35,000 more than what I was originally making. And I want to emphasize, this is the power that realtors can bring to your team. A lot of times we see realtors as the enemy, especially in the wholesaling world today. And realtors see us as the enemies because a lot of times we just simply don't understand the value that we each can bring to each other. The realtors who know how to work with wholesalers and regular sellers on the market know that they can capitalize on that and make money from both sides. Those who are pushing wholesalers away because they hear bad things, they don't really understand it, are really limiting themselves on how much money they can make. Same thing with wholesalers who won't work with realtors. There are bad realtors out there and there are bad wholesalers out there who have bad intentions whenever this happens. But we're not talking about them. They kind of filter themselves out and they make a bad name for themselves. The realtor's buyer ended up closing on the property using hard money. They could close quickly. We did need to get into the property 2 more times, one time for the original inspection and another time because the realtor wanted to give a good faith showing right before closing just to make sure that the property hadn't burned down or nothing seriously wrong with the property had happened. Because I had built great rapport with the seller on my original showing, he was more than happy to show the property to me, and actually had told me, because I had given him an offer that was lower than other people, but I called him first and I was also very respectful and I actually listened to his concerns. And because of that, I won the deal. And I thought that was super powerful when he shared that with me, and I felt like I was on top of the world. I was like, I know these other investors because I go to the real estate meetups with them, and I was so excited just to tell them about the deal and how I got the deal. And I knew they'd be like, well, how'd you do it? I had a lot of fun making this part 2 of this 2-series video. I hope you guys found a lot of value out of it. Again, if you did, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe down below, click that notification bell. And if you have any ideas or questions that you want to see me answer in a video or in the comments section, just comment below what your questions are and I'd love to answer them. As always, I hope to see you all in the next one.